Hi, guys. Welcome back to The Right Brain. We were thinking today we were going to talk about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system.
Yes, another way of talking about that is the polyvagal system. People may have heard that term. It was developed by a doctor and a researcher named Stephen Porges. He's a very, very bright guy who really studied all this stuff in babies, really, in neonates. And
What's a neonate?
it's somebody that is, it's like around, it's, premature babies, little babies, but those that were premature. And what he found was that there were certain babies that would die of sudden infantile death syndrome. And what would happen is that their blood pressure would suddenly drop and they would die. And it didn't make much sense because what in newborns, your sympathetic nervous system or your fight or flight system should be on, right? And that's the part of your nervous system that makes your heart beat really fast. Like if you almost get into a crash or something and all of a sudden, or like a deer runs in front of you and you get really, scared and your heart goes up and, pulse rate gets up, your blood pressure goes up. That's your sympathetic nervous system.
Okay.
So, when you feel like you're in danger, and that's kind of the sympathetic and parasympathetic is really the basis of it in evolution is really safety versus non-safety. Like, are you safe and you can relax and you can socialize and play and, be romantically involved, or are you in danger and you need to like run away or fight and, you need to do that. And that's kind of where, we had talked about in one of our shows, attachment. That's kind of like the basis of attachment is if a baby is in danger, they're supposed to go to their attachment figure. And that's started with development of mammals. And so anyway, there's a trajectory to that. And the parasympathetic is the opposite, where you're relaxed. So it's called the rest and digest and repair system, where your blood pressure goes down, your heart rate goes down. This is what should happen when you're going to go to sleep. And this helps to promote digestion in your body. And that balance of those two, and normally when we're born, when a newborn is born, their sympathetic nervous system is really high. So little babies, their pulse rate is really fast. It's like 140 beats per minute. And their breathing is really kind of rapid. And they don't sleep much through the night. And they're not eating any solid food. And so, they don't really have much digestive function because they don't really have a need to it. They're supposed to be getting breast milk or formula. And you don't really have to digest that. So you don't need to produce acid or digestive enzymes yet. You don't need a lot of blood going to your gut because you're not really absorbing a lot of nutrients. It's just kind of filtering through. And so you don't really need a lot of muscular contraction. So the sympathetic nervous system, because it's fight or flight, it basically takes all the blood and shuts down your digestive function. And so all the energy and blood can go to your arms and legs for running or fighting, into your head or your brain for thinking. So that's what's supposed to happen. But when babies are born, that's what's happening. The blood is mostly going to their brain and their brainstem for growth and development, and to their arms and their legs for basic movement. And so they're in this fight or flight state from when they're born. Then over the first year, as the brainstem matures, the parasympathetic nervous system comes on and it starts to slow down the heart rate. And babies when they start eating solid food around 6-7 months, now they need to start producing digestive enzymes and acid. And they need blood flow to now absorb nutrients and vitamins and amino acids out of the food that they're breaking down. And so the gut closes up, and then they, will start to be more relaxed. And that also promotes pro-social behavior. And so anyway, that those two systems develop that way. But what we find is that if you have imbalances in your brain, the right and the left brain regulate those systems differently as well. The left brain is more sympathetically driven, and the parasympathetic is more, the right brain is more parasympathetic. So, a lot of people that have right brain delays, or just anybody that has delays, they may often have a tendency to have immaturity of their whole brain and brainstem. So they're in this constant fight or flight. Most of the kids that I work with.
If you have a right brain delay, you're saying?
Especially with a right brain, but even with a left brain delay, if your brain is still very immature and your brainstem hasn't fully matured, then you're in this fight or flight. But then there's some people that have an overdevelopment of their right brain, the right brain, and they have too much parasympathetic.
Yeah.
And so those people may have trouble with fainting or feeling faint, or may have chronically low blood pressure or slow heart rate, or may suffer from something called POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, where if they stand up quickly, they feel like they're going to faint, and then their heart rate may go up to try to compensate. And that is often related to trauma and people that have had traumatic experiences as well. I think you said some people that have POTS.
Yeah. So, and that's so that's associated with having a much higher right brain, so that means you have too much parasympathetic. Yeah, I think that I have a slower heart rate.
Yeah, you've always had like low blood pressure.
Yeah.
And a slower heart rate. And you said you tend to get faint sometimes?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of that is also associated with the fact that the primary vestibular system, right? So your inner ear system, that senses where you are in the world, and that has nuclei in the brainstem. The primary center that perceives that is an area in the right brain called the parietal insular vestibular cortex. And so when that is overactive, you get motion sickness really easily. Or if there are imbalances in that system, it can mess up your eyes, which you've always had problems with your eyes.
Yeah.
And it can make you overly sensitive to motion sickness in a car, or trying to read, or you look at your phone while you're driving in a car. And that can cause, again, make your blood pressure drop and make you feel like you're going to pass out and make you break out into a cold sweat type of thing.
Yeah, and that's happened to me my entire life. I didn't realize that was, I've had like weird, really bad motion sickness. Basically every single time I get in a car, I get motion sickness. And if I'm looking at my phone for more than like a second, like I feel like I'm going to throw up. And then I start breaking out in a cold sweat. And then I'm like anxiously like ripping off my jacket in the back of an Uber. Interesting. So that has to do with my eyes because of why?
Well, it's all connected, right? So in your brainstem, where all of this is supposed to first really mature and develop, and we talked a little bit about primitive reflexes, and we'll go there in another time, but suffice to say that all the primitive reflexes primarily come from that lower brainstem area, and that's where the nuclei that control the balance of the sympathetic and parasympathetic come from. And it's also where your inner ear nuclei come from, and also some of the nuclei that regulate your eye movements. So that your inner ear and your eyes are intimately related to one another, right? So when you turn your head, your eyes are going to be driven to, so when you sense head movement, it creates eye movements in different directions. And this is where this is all related. Now,
is this why I'm so bad at driving?
Well, yeah. I mean, when I taught Ellis to drive.
Yes.
Because your mother refused after the first time.
I traumatized her.
I remember she was like, I am not driving. I had to do it with my boy, with Robbie. I'm not doing it with her. There's no way. I think you guys were ready to
kill. Come on. It only took me 4 times to pass my road test.
Well, but Taylor Swift, it took her 4 times too. So I think it's something with great songwriters and singers. So, but I remember the first time we were driving with you that, again, the right brain is about 3D vision. When it's working properly, you have good visual spatial skills. If it's skewed, then your visual spatial skills may be a little off.
Yeah.
And you would always drive to the right so that we'd always be almost clipping all the cars parked on the
I was just
side.
being European.
and it was, I'd always be like, move over, move over, move over. We'd always like miss the mirrors. Like our mirror would just almost miss the
No,
mirror.
I did smash into that one guy that one time.
Yes, that
He's
one
fine.
time. Yeah, he's fine though.
He's
Yes,
fine.
yes.
He wasn't nice anyway.
No.
But yeah, so I guess that has to do with spatial awareness in your
Yes.
brain, which is why I also always smash. I literally won't see walls on this side of my body. Every time I come home to visit them, I just like smack into walls. But that's
And so the right side.
wait, is
so,
it? Yeah, it's this side. I think that.
Yeah, the right side of your body and your visual field to the right of the world is really representative of mostly the left brain.
which I don't really have much of.
Right.
Mhm.
So you have kind of a bias towards the left. And so you kind of neglect the right and you bang into things
Yeah,
on the right side.
because other than smell, everything is cross-lateral. Is that correct? On like your
Yeah.
like
Pretty much.
okay. So like
Yeah.
if you I think I might have said this on here again, but I just don't want people to get confused when we talk about this. Like the reason I can't or I bump into things on my right side of my body is because he's saying it's controlled by my left brain, which obviously we said I have a little bit of a deficit on that side. And that's why I listen to music through my right ear. Keep
Right.
going like this. I can't tell my left or my right. And yes. And so most of the things on the right side of your body are controlled by your left brain and vice versa. I just wanted to reiterate that.
Yes. Yeah. Not all. Like most people think, I mean, if we're talking about voluntary motor activity, like handedness and dominance, foot dominance, eye dominance, ear dominance, having a dominance profile or you doing things consciously is mostly controlled by the opposite side. But most subconscious motor activity, like posture and muscle tone, is the same side. So that's the thing. Also, people think that, with all motor activity that the left brain controls the right. That's not really completely true.
Okay.
Some of it is on the same side. And that's important because a lot of people have imbalances where they have head tilts or rotations, or as we talked about, facial asymmetry, or they may have different angulation, or they may have poor muscle tone on one side, but yet they can have fine with their voluntary muscle control. So, the way we, and that has something to do with the way that we navigate the world and feel the world and perceive the world as well. But people that have overactive can have this thing called POTS, which is really, a lot of people really suffer with that.
Yeah, let's lean into that because I think there's a lot of musicians that I've read about that have that. So which I guess goes hand in hand with being right brain creatives.
Yeah, and I had a guy recently call me. He was a lawyer from LA, and he was really struggling with this really badly. And he was, looking for people. No one was really helping him. And if anything, a lot of the people that he'd seen were making him worse. And it just goes down to speak that most people don't really know about the nervous system and how it works and, about the neuroscience underneath everything. They have some level of understanding, but not. And so this guy was, saying, someone was telling me I need to do vagal stimulation. I need to stimulate my vagus nerve. And I was like, but in POTS, your vagal system is too sensitive. And if you do that, it's going to make you worse. And he was like, oh,
wow, okay.
Maybe that's why I've been getting worse. And I'm like, yeah, but they diagnosed it properly as POTS, but then the solution was, this is where, kind of drives me a bit crazy on when I see Instagram and, a lot of these people in the biohacking world, which is great. Some of them are very knowledgeable, but a lot of them really have no idea what they're talking about. They may have, found something and they may use it and it may work for them. But I think a lot of the people are just kind of promoting stuff because they get paid for it. But, and they're all like, well, we need to do vagal nerve stimulation, not really understanding anything about what that means, right? It's actually part of the parasympathetic nervous system. And, what that does and, how those systems develop and why do you need to stimulate that? Why would you be in more of a sympathetically dominant state, right? Which
Right.
creates more of a stress response. And so, people naturally are like, well, we live stressful lives. Yes, but there's the stress response in your body, which is the sympathetic nervous system. So more people suffer with that, where they're in this the body's constantly in a state of stress. But that is also more of a left brain driven thing. And it also has to do with, if you don't have really good brain development or immaturity in parts of your brain, or if you have retained primitive reflexes. But then some people have the opposite, which is where there's too much of this parasympathetic drive and they feel like they're going to faint all the time, or, they freeze all the time, or, especially if they're nervous or scared, like I think stage fright, where people might literally freeze on stage. That's a form of over parasympathetic response. So freezing is a parasympathetic response. Running and fighting is a sympathetic response. And a lot of people talk about the fight, flight, and freeze.
Yeah.
As if they're the same system. They're not. They're opposite systems, actually. So, this is where understanding that. But this guy, was going through treatment where they were doing vagal nerve stimulation on him, and he was getting worse. And it's just clearly if the person knew the neurology of POTS, you would think, all right, that probably isn't a good thing to do.
Wow. So what was your suggestion for him?
My suggestion to him was that we need to actually drive his left brain more. We need to, again, check him for retained primitive reflexes, because if there's an immaturity of the brainstem because the reflexes never fully went away,
Mm-hmm.
or if there's an imbalance in the vestibular system, and some people can get it as a result of a brain injury or concussion.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Again, a lot of soldiers who have had, a mild traumatic brain injury, and then who also may have PTSD, because PTSD is also related to an overactivity of that right brain, and trauma is related to that. So people that have been traumatized, or people that, really have trauma, they may also be related and get POTS. I had a woman recently who was a doctor therapist, very knowledgeable person, who was taking one of my courses in Italy. And we did an assessment on her. And not only did she have all of these primitive reflexes there, she was really suffering from POTS. And then when we went into her childhood, she broke down because, she had suffered some fairly significant sexual abuse from family member when she was young, and all of this was in her, but it all came together neurologically and made perfect sense, but no one had ever put this together like that for her, and meanwhile she's an extremely knowledgeable person, great person, but was struggling with this. And even though she was an athlete and she really exercised, she knew a lot about her body, she couldn't find anybody that really could deal with that, because you had to look at all of it. You have to look at the developmental trajectory, the fact that she had these primitive reflexes, which means from the very beginning of time, her nervous system has never been completely balanced, and very gifted. I mean, she was a gifted athlete. She's unbelievably empathetic person. So a lot of people that are right brain also go into healthcare world because they're caretakers, they're empaths, they want to care for people. And she did that. She gravitated towards working with people that had a lot of trauma. And what happens was that she would take on that trauma, and just like when Danny was talking about when he does that singing with people that have, the soldiers, that you can take that on. And she found that it was really difficult to let go of that.
Yeah.
And that also had an impact on driving that right brain, right? So she had this imbalance from the time she was a child. And we know that because these primitive reflexes were still there, all of them really strong, as a matter of fact.
And again, just to say what primitive reflexes are really quick, just in case people are just tuning in.
Yeah, real quick. Primitive reflexes are these basic simple program movements that we're all born with.
Mm-hmm.
And we're born with them because the human brain is unique in that we have the most immature brain at birth of pretty much any animal. And the reason for that is that out of all primates, we have the biggest head. We have the biggest brain per body size. So we have a really big head for our body, and our brain is because of that. And because we're bipedal, we walk upright, and we're the only primates that do that. Humans also have the smallest birth canal. So we have these really big heads with this really small birth canal. So human brains have a unique mechanism where we have to really restrict growth in the womb. We can't grow too much. It grows a lot, but we can't grow too much because the head will get too big and we won't get out. So human brains and the genes that really govern our brain development are also the most sensitive genes that we have to the environment, because they need to be able to know when I'm in the womb, don't grow so much. And then when I'm outside the womb, and what's the difference inside versus outside? The difference is when you get out, you get bombarded by all these senses, right? You feel gravity and sound and light and everything bombards you. And so the genes that are sensitive to that, they're called experience sensitive genes or experience driven genes. They, as soon as they're bombarded by different senses, they then start to grow, and they cause our brain to grow really rapidly, so that we go from 20% of our adult size when we're born to 90% in 3 years. And what drives all of that is movement. We have to be able to move to initiate all of that. But the part of our brain that controls movement isn't really developed yet, right? Humans are the only animals that can't just, get up right away and run and walk. It takes a year for us to be able to walk. So the motor cortex, the part of our brain that controls movement, isn't really formed. So how do we move, which we need to move to build our brain, but we don't have the part of the brain that moves us voluntarily? We're born in the lower part of the brainstem, which is active at birth, these reflexes that allow us to do basic things like root and suck so we can feed ourselves, or grasping reflexes, little babies that automatically grab your thumb, or writing reflexes, or the Moreau startle response, or rolling reflexes or turning reflexes. And these reflexes are there even before you're born, so that, a baby miraculously in the third trimester, somehow babies get in the right position, or they're supposed to get in the right position, turn upside down and backwards and get down into the birth canal, which stimulates the birth process, and they should do it without getting the cord wrapped around their neck. How does that happen? How does a baby know how to do that? Well, these reflexes are directing that movement in the womb. So if a baby doesn't get in the right position, if they're in a breech position, or if the cord gets wrapped around their neck, then maybe these reflexes aren't really developing the way that they're supposed to, and their movement isn't working the way they're supposed to, which means their brain may not be maturing at the right pace. And then these reflexes are there to literally help the baby birth themselves, like something called the asymmetric tonic neck reflex. When a baby turns its head, the arm and leg on one side straighten up and the other side flexes. This helps them twist down the birth canal. They turn to the right as they come down. And then there's something called the spinal galant, which is along their spine, that if you stroke the spine, the baby will flex, and that helps them push themselves out. So if a baby gets stuck on the way out, where they need forceps, or they need vacuum to help the baby come out. I had one mom recently, she told me that the baby was mostly out and then just got sucked back up into her womb, and they had to use a vacuum to get the baby out. Why would that happen? Well, because the baby should do the end work of pushing themselves out. And if they're not doing that, and the mom's doing all the work up to that point, then, again, why wouldn't that happen? About 85-90% of the babies, of the kids that we work with, especially in the non-speaking autism end of it, couldn't latch on to breastfeed right away. They had trouble with that, meaning that rooting and sucking reflex may not be fully formed. And then if it's not, then you don't go through all these different stages and you may not roll over properly. You may not crawl properly. You may skip something. You may go walk too late or walk too early or speak late or not point. And it all leads to that. So that's what primitive reflexes are.
Wow.
They're these basic program reflexes. And really right around 1 year, they should lead us through this first year of development and all the stages, which are really important. So when a doctor or somebody says, oh, it doesn't matter that they didn't roll over or crawl or whatever, it does matter. And that doesn't mean that, because we put that out there and you always get the person that writes, well, I have 3 kids and they're perfect and none of them crawled, right? And so, it's something that you should be aware of,
Yeah.
right? And
which plays into kind of like what you were saying with like things being cross lateral. It's like when you're crawling, you're like doing those movements, I don't know, like moving this hand and this leg,
right,
opposite hand, opposite leg, and that's like creating the networks in your brain.
Right. And so that you can,
in my simplistic way of explaining,
you start integrating it together, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, as we've talked about, that right brain is developing first, primarily in the first 2 to 3 years, and then the left brain comes online. So all of this is happening, and it's supposed to happen in certain stages. And along with that, when we're born, that sympathetic nervous system is on. And then over the course of the first year, the parasympathetic nervous system should come on. And that represents maturity of the lower part of the brainstem and the brain vertically integrating, going up and then coming down, right? And that's the way it's supposed to work. And if that doesn't happen, then we can have either too much fight or flight and be in a fight or flight state your whole life. And that also promotes inflammatory states or inflammation. Or we can be in too much of a parasympathetic rest and digest, where our blood pressure may be low, or you may be prone to fainting or passing out, or low blood pressure and too much anti-inflammatory, or where you may have a low immune response.
Well, I have a question about that because I meant to like text you about this the other day because I thought you said something about the parasympathetic, or maybe I was watching somebody talking about working on it. Either way, something I've always experienced is like very like small things. Like I hate looking at my email because every time I get an email, like my whole body goes into like I like freak out mode, and I think I'm about to get an email that's gonna tell me like I owe $7 million to the government for some reason because I made a mistake somewhere along the way. Like I don't know, but it's like every time I get an email and it like dings on my phone, I'm like, and I freak out. Or if I get a text message from like a number that I don't know and I haven't fully read it yet, and it's like a long paragraph, and maybe I see one word that I latch onto that makes me think it's going to be this horrible, like someone is sending me to jail. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like the full like feeling I get throughout my entire body is like so awful and happens so frequently. And does that have to do with my parasympathetic, like or just the fact that I have anxiety? Because I thought I was hearing someone say that like you're not supposed to feel it like that through your whole body. It's not supposed to be like a physical reaction.
Well, there's a few different reasons for that. One is that the right brain really is more looking out for danger. So a sense of danger is right brain governs what we call withdrawal behavior. So it's looking for potential prey, or predators or people, or, something that's going to kill us. And anything that's new and novel that we don't know, anything that's not familiar could be dangerous. So the right brain is always looking out for that. And there's something called the vigilance network, which is a network that is vigilant. And part of that is related to the sympathetic. So at the lower levels of the right brain, it's really related to vigilance and has some level of sympathetic control. But then the earliest primitive reflex is something known as a fear paralysis reflex. So that develops first in the womb and should be gone by the time we're born. But and that later on manifests as a freeze response.
Okay.
And, most people do have certain level of freeze response. We know that, people during times of trauma, they will go into this freeze state. And that is a remnant of what's called the fear paralysis reflex. And that should be gone. But we see a lot of kids that are immature and that, still have a lot of their primitive reflexes, that a lot of people still have that fear response and that freezing response, or they get, like I always say, they go from 0 to 10, right? We get some kids that as soon as you do anything that they feel uncomfortable, or if you try to stop them from, running around the room, they go from 0 to 10 and they will act like, like their life's in danger. That's what the fear paralysis reflex does. It basically says your life's in danger, right? So you're terrified. Like freezing is when you really feel like, okay, we're going to die. And that's where the freeze response comes from. And in animals, the significance of that is that, we know like a deer in headlights, right? They freeze. Why? Because at the moment when they really feel like, there's a difference between being in danger versus where you really feel like death is imminent.
Yeah.
And so the fight or flight is really more when you feel like you're in danger and you need to fight. But the freeze response is like when you really expect that I'm going to die right now. Like, like a bear is coming after me and it's like, okay. And then it's when you faint, it's referred to as feigning death, right? So what do they tell you? Like if a bear's coming, I don't know much about this. I'm not a woodsman, but I've always heard that if a bear's coming after you, play dead.
Okay.
Okay. And so the fear paralysis reflex and the freeze response basically makes you act like you're dead. It lowers your heart rate so much and your breathing, and it causes you to maybe faint or pass out or lose consciousness. And it literally kind of disconnects your conscious memory system from your subconscious memory system. And it floods your body with endorphins to numb your body in anticipation that you're going to get killed, right? That you're going to be that you're not going to feel that level of pain, right? Like if animal is going to eat you or something. And so when you think about it, that's exactly what happens to people when they're traumatized. Like if someone's raped or if they're in war or if they feel that. And that's what happens during trauma. People get their body, they become disconnected from their body, which is what we call dissociation. They dissociate. They may pass out or faint or lose consciousness. They don't remember the moment of the trauma because your brain literally tries to make you not remember it. So it disconnects your memory system and you feel your body goes numb and you feel like disconnected from your body. Like people that, rape victims will talk about how they've disconnected from their body during that moment, right? And that's really this neurological freeze response that's happening. And this is trauma. And there's a benefit to it, but the negative is that your subconscious right brain is still active and it does form a memory of the trauma and the physical feelings and the terror and the pain. It lives in your subconscious right brain.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And it can be triggered by subconscious things that you don't realize. And that's why trauma is so difficult, because you don't, if you ask most people during a traumatic event, they don't remember the event. They know it happened.
Yeah.
But then why are they still traumatized by it if they don't remember it? Because their subconscious and their body remembers it. But when it comes back as a memory, it doesn't feel like a memory because it doesn't feel like it's coming from the past. It's happening now.
Wow.
Yeah. So the right brain is
fascinating.
always in the now, right?
Yeah.
So that it's not like your left brain has a memory system that you can go, oh, that was in my past, and you can project into the future. The right brain just kind of experiences the now. And so if you have trauma and it lives in that subconscious and you don't really remember it, but you know it happened, but it's living there, that it can get triggered. Like, let's say, somebody who abused somebody as a child, let's say they had a certain color hair and a certain beard and a certain body shape. And the child may not even remember the act of being abused, but in their right brain and in their subconscious, it lives.
Wow.
And then they come across somebody who has that same shape or the same color hair, and they don't even recognize it, but all of a sudden their body can go into this freezing response, or feel like they get really anxious or nervous or hyperventilate or have a panic attack. And then they think about it and they don't realize that it's that person reminds them of the person that abused them, but consciously they have no conscious recollection of it, but the subconscious recollection is there.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah.
I think that'll be really good for people to hear, because that's so complicated.
It is. And that's why there's a complicated neurology under trauma and PTSD, and it's often related to POTS, right? Because when people have that, they overactivate then that right brain and that parasympathetic and that freeze response, which is kind of what you're getting when you get an email, right? Yeah. You're getting this email, you have this sense of danger, and it kicks in this fear response. What was interesting about you is that because, again, this just goes to show you that you can be raised in a really great, loving family. And I think, even that lack of touching and being held, that from the time you were young, your eyes were a little off, you had a little slight tremor. And it was interesting, and I wonder how much of an impact those 2 weeks of you not being held and not being, how much that might have impacted you and may have not, because in the beginning, the mother and the caregiver is so instrumental in that emotional regulation. The mother's right brain talks to the baby's right brain and literally allows them to develop the mechanisms in the right brain to soothe, to activate that parasympathetic nervous system, to calm down. And that's when, babies, you start to suck their thumb and do things, or that help soothe themselves, and so all of that is related. And I wonder if that may be partly why, you struggled with a lot of that stuff early on.
Yeah. Didn't you say something about the fact that it's like fluorescent lighting, like, is left on the entire time too?
Yeah, we did a study in our lab a few years ago looking at, newborns or people or babies that were in like a NICU, that were, at high risk births, that were born early, premature. And what we did was we measured their stress response and their cortisol levels, which is your response to stress response. And what happens is that, the baby, they're constantly taking blood. So they're sticking the baby with needles all the time. And, and listen, I'm not putting down, they're trying to keep an infant alive, right?
Yeah, you're just saying how it impacts.
Yeah, but yeah. And they have the lights on 24 hours. So their natural circadian rhythm and the stress response. So these babies are on really high stress responses all the time, constantly being, and we were able to show this, that their cortisol levels were constantly high, and that it reacted to the needle, and it reacted to the fact that the lights were constantly on. And, that can have a huge impact in the first, couple of weeks or couple of months. Some babies might be in there for a couple of months at least. Sometimes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Wow. This is a lot. This is good.
Yeah.
It's crazy how everything is connected. Like, it all just comes back to each other.
Well, it's all related to the brain. And that's where, my search has been to really understand this. That's why, kind of irks me a little bit when people just say, well, just stimulate the vagus nerve. And I'm like, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And, like this guy with POTS, someone was like, oh, well, stimulate the vagal system. I'm like,
you're like, well, you have to know what you're stimulating.
Yeah, it's absolutely like, you need to understand the neurological mechanism. You need to understand development, because as we've talked about before, almost all adult mental health issues really start in childhood, in those first 6 years when the right brain and the left brain are developing. And if the primitive reflexes don't go away, that is something that will stay with you. And as we've said over and over, the people that are more prone to imbalances are those that are unusually gifted in one side or the other, where that side of the brain might be so strong and it might become too strong too early. And it might hold back another area from developing so that it develops too late or it doesn't really fully mature. And that to me is the foundation of it all. And so really understanding how this all works. And, I've dedicated my life to it. And there's not too many other people that really understand this completely.
Yeah.
And you are the embodiment of that. And that's why you wanted to be able to bring this out there, especially to your creative world and your creative community, and, really, have them understand it. Because I guarantee you that, as you said, you probably know a lot of people that have POTS or feel like they faint or feel like they freeze, or, I think stage fright has a lot to do with that. And it has to do with, some of that and the way it governs socialization and attachment, which we went through all attachment disorders. And it really, kind of goes back to that safety, non-safety, attachment, regulating the autonomic system. Again, there's a lot of misconceptions out there about, people think that everything starts in the gut, that it starts with your stomach. It starts with your gut, not working properly. And the gut is very important. And it is, if your parasympathetic nervous system doesn't develop, then your gut never fully matures or develops, and you have a leaky gut, and you don't produce acid and enzymes, and it can create a lot of inflammation, and it can wreak havoc on your body and your brain. But it's not the cause of it. It's not where it starts. And that's what most people that don't really know about the brain and the nervous system, that you can change your diet and you can have a great diet. And if you heal your gut, that's great, but you'll never completely heal your gut unless you actually get your brain to be in proper balance and your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system to be in proper balance.
We'll have to do a whole episode on that too, because I'm sure so many people have gut issues and inflammation in their body, and I'm sure have no idea that it has to do with their brain. But wow, okay, this is great. I think this is going to be really helpful to a lot of people. And yeah.
Have you ever fainted? Have you ever passed out? Have you ever felt like...
I've been very, very close to that. I'll get up and feel like I'm about to fall, or things like that have happened.
Yeah, because all of that is also related to your blood sugar regulation system too.
Yeah.
So people that are hypoglycemic, I think you get that a lot, right? Like where you feel like shaky.
Yeah, shaky,
if
cold
you're not
sweats.
eating.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's two real simple things that most people should know. First of all, if you eat a big meal, within reason, but when you eat, after you eat, you should never feel tired.
I remember you told me that.
And also, after you eat, you shouldn't feel this big burst of energy. Either way, if you feel really tired after you eat, that's a sign that you might be bordering on pre-diabetic. Pre-diabetic, that's funny. Have you ever seen Kevin James' thing on that? Yeah. That's very funny. Doctor says, you're pre-diabetic. Am I diabetic? No, you're pre-diabetic. Okay, what does that mean? It means, am I diabetic? No, but you could be. Okay, and he says to the doctor, could you be diabetic? No. He said, do you have diabetes? No. Could you get diabetes? Yeah. So you pre-diabetic. But anyway,
but I guess it is a real thing.
It is a real thing, right? But Kevin, I'll give you credit for that. He's my friend next time I see him. But yes, that was a very funny thing.
We'll get him on here to tell that joke.
Right. Yes, exactly. But there is a thing called prediabetes, and that's where, if you feel really tired after you eat, that is not supposed to happen. And then if you feel like shaky and you have to eat something and then you get this burst of energy, that's usually that you're hypoglycemic. And again, those states are regulated within your autonomic, sympathetic, parasympathetic systems and all of that. So, all these things, you have to look at it from a big picture, which is what the right brain does. It always looks at the big picture.
Amazing. Okay, guys. If you're listening and you have any questions, which I have a million more questions after this episode, but yeah, if you can relate to this and you want more details or anything like that, just as I always say, send in your questions, and we'll see you next time.
Yep.
And thanks for being here.
See you next time.
See you next time.
Love you, honey.
Love you too.